So my first question is, as you are working with adults, children, adolescents, and forensic cases right now, what are the main challenges that you are currently experiencing?
It's both in terms of clinical work and I also do a lot of teaching. And I think doing things like this is a challenge to me. I've never done it before in my life. I've always avoided doing telephone and Skype or any kind of visual forms of communicating, because I really like face-to-face contact where I'm aware of somebody's whole body state, and there's things that I think are quite subtle that we don't get in face-to-face contact, which we don't get without direct physical contact, which is probably subtle things like smell, actually, things that you don't quite know you're getting but make quite a big difference, and subtle movements and those sorts of things. But basically, I think the main challenge at the moment is the extraordinary levels of appropriate anxiety, both in colleagues and in myself and in people around and in my clients. And it's obviously very different working with kids and working with adults. And I haven't done any direct clinical work with any of the children as yet. So that will start. So at the moment it's with some young people and with adults. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the big problems that we're facing clinically is that, as you said, Confer is a community, and people's emotional health and well-being depends hugely on being part of a community. And social isolation is a really big risk, and not a good. We all know that resilience and well-being, etc., gets enhanced hugely by being part of a community, by having human beings around you. All kinds of neurochemicals like oxytocin get released when we're with other people that we like and we trust. And we're in a climate where people are shunning each other or isolating from each other for really good, appropriate reasons. But those who are most vulnerable are particularly at risk at the moment, I think, of having symptoms like high levels of anxiety or depressive symptoms, or even trauma symptoms, or symptoms of feeling not good enough, or very low self-esteem. All those things I'm seeing an increase in those things at some level. Peculiarly enough, there are also some patients who seem calmer than I've ever seen them. So that's another interesting thing. Maybe.
Yeah, I think that is very interesting, because I think that a lot of people who have experienced sort of ongoing developmental and ongoing trauma are very used to high stress situations. So this for them could in some respects be something that they're quite familiar with, a sort of survival response, which is familiar to something they've experienced in childhood. But at some point there must be a kind of collapse.
I think it's both that they're familiar with it, but also they feel a bit more normal, because everybody's struggling with what they live with most of the time.
Exactly.
They don't feel quite so different. But also, I think you're absolutely right. There's something about, they know this. They know how to be in a threat state. They know how to be in a fear state. They know how to be anxious. And actually, interestingly, I think some of them were more like, in fact, they went in two directions. Some were more like the cuckoo, like the canaries in the coal mine, who were isolated much more quickly than others and were really, really frightened. Others were more like head in the sand, actually, and didn't want to take in the reality of what was going on. That's probably true for all of us, including psychotherapists, but it's quite an interesting distinction.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly from what I've observed, not clinically, but sort of out and about, those that are making huge efforts to be socially distanced 2 meters apart, and those who just are not, are still meeting in groups and out in the parks and stuff.
Absolutely.
And, it's hard to understand why there would be such different responses, but reading through your blog post, The Good, the Bad and the Scared, Keeping Compassion Alive Amidst COVID-19, Panic Herds and Social Isolation, that we will share through our website, I was thinking about these paranoid schizoid states that are sort of neurologically pre-programmed. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about that.
I think because it's been shifting so dramatically fast, haven't taken in the reality of the situation. It's shifted. People who come from a background of stress and trauma, developmental trauma particularly, they struggle with change. They struggle with the unexpected. They want things to be the same. And I know we're working with any of the kids we work with, that those who come from those kinds of backgrounds, if there's a little shift, like, I don't know, a change of a supply teacher or a slight shift in their routine in school, that's when they get chaotic or they get very rigid. Mm-hmm. And so if you're working with a very vulnerable client group, then you see more of that, I think. Neurochemically, and basically, we all need a threat system. Like all the trauma therapists have been saying for years now, our threat and fear system is utterly appropriate as a way of keeping us safe. It's we have a negativity bias. We expect difficulty. We expect danger, and we react to it. But we also evolve to calm down and come back to normal quite quickly. And the kind of client group that most of us are working with aren't like that. They don't really know safeness, and they don't really know what it feels like to have a sense of genuinely deep well-being and those sorts of things. So this is their normal, as we said, but in a way, I think there's a kind of exacerbated variant of this that we're seeing at the moment. Some of our clients, of course, are incredibly sensitive to the therapist's state of mind, and if we are anxious, they are like barometers. Some are completely impervious, very, very thick-skinned, but some are incredibly thin-skinned and absolutely feel they're. We like to think of ourselves as barometers or sounding boards for our clients, patients, but actually they nearly always are of us as well. Mm-hmm. And they pick up our levels of anxiety, and that's reflected in their postures, that's reflected in how they think and how they feel, and that will increase their levels of anxiety, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think so, and I think that it's very interesting because most psychotherapists are older by the nature of this profession.
Yeah, including me.
Well, but and a lot older. I mean, there's
a lot older,
therapists in their late 70s and early 80s that are working and very active and very fit and healthy, but they're definitely in this, high risk
older demographic. Yeah, absolutely.
And I wonder what happens between the therapeutic dyad when there is vulnerability. There is now vulnerability in the therapist. And it has to be acknowledged.
It has to be acknowledged, and I think if it isn't, then we're not being truthful, and that will take its place within the therapeutic sessions. Mm. I think Winnicott knew about this. When he was vulnerable and had very serious heart problems, he would talk about the fact that he might die. And some people felt that was burdensome to the patient. But I think he did it. If you read how he did it in such a way that he was making it clear that he was a vulnerable human being as well. And he was sort of preparing people. I also think there's something about, so one of the big technical challenges, which is maybe tougher for people psychoanalytically trained, is can we allow our patients, our clients, to offer us some concern and some, checking in with how we are, and can we accept that without batting it back as a kind of, in terms of making a transference interpretation or having to blank a screen and those sorts of things? Because actually, as the great Harold Searles often used to talk about, patients need, and everyone needs, to have a chance to look after the other, and that's a growth-inducing process in itself, as long as we don't do it in such a way that they really feel they are genuinely looking after us in too burdensome way. But those little moments, often all people need. I think we have to accept genuine concern, especially if we're in the more vulnerable age group. And it's probably quite clear to our clients if we are in the vulnerable age group or not. If we've got some obvious health concerns, breathing difficulties, slightly overweight, whatever it is, they will pick it up. And I think we have to accept their concern in a genuine, heartfelt way, in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And to acknowledge one's own fear and to work with that. But I think, I suppose I was going to say, particularly for clients who've had parents who were quite vulnerable themselves, and that they, this sort of going on being was not really experienced.
Yeah, but you can be really careful with those clients. Yeah, so you got any hint of you burdening them with your issues and being narcissistic and not being with them, they will pick that up like a shot. But I think we can spot that, and we should be alert to that, and we can work with it. But so there's danger in either direction. And the great thing about being a psychotherapist, like anything in life, is that You make mistakes, you screw it up, and you recover from it because you see the signs if you read the patient's clients well enough. And it's quite clear, even if it's a flicker of the eye or a slight tensing of the body or something, when we say something which doesn't go down very well, or we're acting in a way that doesn't go down very well. And that's our chance to repair. And that's, in a way, it's ruptures and repairs, mismatches and repairs that are the seat at the heart of becoming resilient and emotional growth, etc.
So in fact, what you're saying is it's kind of business as usual, but with more to work with in the room in many ways.
More and less, yeah. In some ways, it's very interesting. So, looking at you now, you looking at me, I've noticed that I've got the camera where actually there's very little of me actually showing.
Yeah.
I've noticed two things clinically, and I realise I need training in this. Do we position ourselves so that you can see the whole body?
Yeah.
Because in a way, there's all kinds of bodily clues. So, two people I saw the other day, one just from here upwards as well, and I could see the tension in his neck and face and those sorts of things, but I couldn't there's things I couldn't read. Whereas another client, it was from the waist upwards, but I could notice the breathing when it got shallow and tense. Those sorts of things are really important to pay attention to. They're really important signs, and we need to help them make sense of what's going on for them and what might be going on between us through those signals. So do you position yourself with a whole body or not? And actually the other thing that's very interesting is, do you even use video? So people who are working on the couch are increasingly, we're working with the couch more. Clients are working with the couch. You would tend to probably just use the telephone because they don't see you anyway. But one of the slightly interesting and threatening but fascinating things about the current this way of working, I realize, is that in a way you've got more permission to look and to be looked at than you do generally in psychotherapy.
I've also heard that those working on the couch are doing this clever idea where they use their iPad or their phone and they FaceTime, and then the client puts the device behind them on their bedside table or whatever, so that the therapist can see their body.
Yeah.
Because obviously if you're on the couch, you greet your therapist at the door and you see them, and you say goodbye to them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and on the phone you don't get that.
No.
So I think there are extremely creative ways of doing this.
Yeah. I mean, I must say I'm a novice, so for me, I need supervision about some of the practicalities. So one of the things is, I've decided to set up meetings and let people call into it. And so I'll be waiting rather like you would be in the consulting room, rather than them calling me, or those sorts of things. But it's all completely new.
Yeah.
I mean, there's small things in comparison to the enormity of what's going on out there, but there's still interesting technical issues. One of the things that I feel that is confronting people at the moment is how to feel part of something, and feel that you're with other people and other people with you, rather than you're isolated at all. So we're living in an increasingly individualistic world. The anthropologists distinguish between egocentric and sociocentric cultures, and people talk about neoliberal individual competitiveness, etc. And we as a culture have gone increasingly in that direction, maybe following the US trajectory. Other bits of Europe are a bit behind us, and hopefully they won't come quite as far. But there's something that happens when you're feeling under threat, which makes you increase your distrust of others, increase your competitiveness, and it can inhibit the ability to sort of join with others and to feel part of a group with a common purpose. And I think a big part of what we need to do, and I think it's partly, some of my work has been in working with institutions and organizations, is trying to help ensure that that kind of state of mind can be placed back center stage. So for example, what we know, of course, is that when you're feeling threatened and there's danger around, then we tend to be much more selfish. We tend to be much more aggressive. We tend to see people less as other human beings and show less empathy. All of those parts of us turn off. And on the other hand, this could be an opportunity to turn those parts on again, in a way, by ensuring that we're developing more community focused things. So the first extreme might be the kind of sorry everybody else, I'm going to get every toilet roll I can.
Yeah, that's definitely yeah,
which interestingly isn't happening in other parts of Europe,
yeah.
which I think is really, really fascinating. But there are alternatives. There's some very interesting, beautiful kind of community activities that are being developed, including sort of group mindfulness, group meditations, group singing, all kinds of really interesting things. I did a yoga Pilates class online. There's a lot of that going on these days. We're doing meditations for our students at the Tavistock, and so there's a whole range of different things which can still foster community. But I think it might really awaken people's awareness of what a desperate plight we might be in psychologically in this country at the moment. Anyway, before all this happened,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so I think there's opportunities amidst the absolute awfulness that we're seeing, especially in the NHS and especially amongst the more vulnerable population. It's unthinkable in their relatives, etc.
mm,
Many people live in a slightly manic world, and I've been as guilty of it as anybody. You know, how are you doing? Oh, I'm so busy, kind of response, and that kind of dopaminergic stimulated response of whether it's buying online or keeping up with everything or being very, very, very busy. These are all sort of addictive states of the mind,
yeah.
which can keep you away from what really is important or what you might be feeling underneath that you don't want to feel. And so I think that, again, there's genuine opportunities here, because actually you can't be that busy. I mean, I'm pretty busy, but I'd rather, there's absolutely no question that there's space to think about things, including what our values are and what kind of world we want to be living in at the moment.
Well, unless you're a parent,
Yeah.
and then there is very little space. I keep thinking, oh yes, perhaps I'll read that book or do that embroidery, and then I realise I've got to do a job and some distance learning, quite a lot of distance learning.
Yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely.
actually, for parents, it's quite a
Very,
juggle.
very tough. Very, very tough. And you can't, if you're homeschooling, you can generally, when this isn't going on, you've got support of other people who are doing it, you've got resources, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the amount of, it's no coincidence that Winnicott talked about all those reasons why a mother might hate their baby. It's
Yeah.
very, very tough. 24 hours stuck in a box. It's
Yeah.
not part of our evolutionary heritage at all. We're a cooperative breeding species. We evolved to bring up children in groups. We evolved to bring up children as part of ordinary everyday life with support from others all around us all the time. And so this is could be a real problem for kids, especially as on top of that, I think many kids are feeling that they are, I notice people looking looking actually quite worried by seeing children running around, for example, on Hampstead Heath, quite rightly, because they could be carriers of this virus without knowing it and without any intentionality. But so I feel in a way that because they're seen as dangerous at the moment, I think that makes it even more worrying. But I think for parents, my goodness. So obviously the people I feel most sorry for at the moment are the people who are ill. And secondly, the health workers on the front line. And we're hearing horrendous stories coming out of some of the hospitals. I don't know how true they all are, or I just don't know. But and the shocking state of the NHS. And I think parents also really, really, really need support at the moment. So the kind of young people, children and adults I work with, they nearly all had vulnerable parents, which I think is a nice way of putting it, even if they were also abusive and traumatizing and both fearful and fear-inducing. But if you're stuck with a child whose vulnerability you can't tolerate, and for example, we know in disorganized attachment, one of the classic features is an inability to tolerate vulnerable feelings, sad feelings, difficult feelings, negative feelings at all, in oneself and in one's children, because those feelings in one's children are triggering of our own feelings. So I do worry about what the outcome of this will be for some of these kids for whom actually the best place to be is in school and nursery, where there's some respite from that sort of thing. Yeah. And I'm worried as well about the people that I work with who, I don't know, use a lot of internet things, some legal, some illegal, and are very dependent on those things. And you desperately want, anyway, those people to get outside and meet people and talk to people.
And not
And
stuck inside with their internet.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, not just stuck aside with screens and all kinds of things, even just the vitamin D
Yeah.
and the turning on of dopaminergic circuits and the turning off of the kind of circuits that allow you to rest and feel relaxed and sleep and all those sorts of things.
Mm.
So just those very, very basic in a very concrete way, but actually it's not going to do them any good. And these are people who turn to these forms of addiction, like technology, which are forms of addiction, whether it's with pornography or whatever, when they're feeling more stressed, when they're feeling more anxious. And
Yeah.
I think we all turn to our objects of addiction when we're feeling slightly more anxious.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even Nigella Lawson has been reported as eating a huge, massive bar of chocolate every night at home. And
Really?
I think I found myself sort of checking the news too much to start with, and then I found somewhere putting some boundary around it. I'm lucky enough, for example, to have a few friends or support structures, so I can key into those. I can have a Zoom meeting with my Blokes Book Club or with my colleagues at the Portman or a few good friends who are living out of London, but not the people we work with. Or often they're incredibly isolated.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if the weekly therapy session is the thing that gets them out the house once a week, and that's pretty crucial, isn't it?
It really is. And often for kids, interestingly, it's the journey to therapy with their parents that I sometimes think is almost as important as the actual therapy session, because they get one-to-one time and they get a very different form of emotional contact.
Yeah.
And they feel looked after and taken care of. And then, of course, they're having a very different experience in their therapy. And for adults, of course, very different.
I mean, the psychotherapeutic community's got quite a lot on its shoulders at the moment with vulnerable patients and how to work online, but wondering how we can support health workers.
It's so important. If we can't support them, then I mean the system is at such risk of collapse anyway. I think that anything we can offer, it would be really helpful, and we have to offer whatever resources, free resources that we can offer. I think the level of anxiety and then the level of what Isabel Menzies Life described as kind of manic type of defenses against emotional truth, as in it, she was very influenced by Bion as well, of course.
Mm.
Is it's utterly off the scale. Last year, I was involved in a project that Tavistock Consultancy Service did with a hospital in southwest London, and these nurses were like heroes and heroines. They were just incredible, and we offered them a mixture of classic, so I suppose Tavistock work discussion groups, and we did mindfulness with them as well, and
Mm.
including some psychoeducation, and we coached the managers, and it was the level of trauma. I think all three of us who were involved in the intervention had never felt quite so overwhelmed by a piece of work in many ways, and we thought it wasn't going very well. But actually, in the end, they won an NHS retention award, the trust, for putting this into place, and it was an extraordinary thing. Every nurse in the unit was trained in this, in the way we were working. But then, when I think back, then they were all completely overwhelmed. There weren't enough resources. There weren't enough beds. People on trolleys all over the place. This was just a slightly worse winter than usual, for example. I really fear that either people retreat or they go into a kind of manic omnipotent, I can do anything. And I think psychoanalysis, like other forms of psychotherapy, have got an awful lot to offer.
Yeah,
In that,
that's what I think.
I think absolutely. I think when I'm teaching mindfulness, I'm also a mindfulness teacher sometimes. We always say, and compassion focused therapy says the same thing. You have to. It's that old airplane analogy. You have to put your own oxygen mask on first before you can support anybody else.
Mm.
And the temptation for many people in the caring professions, and that includes psychotherapists and nurses, is to manically be looking after everybody else and not looking after ourselves. And that is when burnout happens, I think. So it's not the oxygen mask, it's the kind of it's the virus protecting mask that people need to be putting on. But
Mm.
it's about being able to breathe, bring down those inflammatory cytokine levels,
Yeah.
and working out what we have to really worry about and what we can't stop worrying about, but maybe doesn't need to be worried about quite so much, and working out what the difference is, etc.
It seems to me that a group intervention would be really, really helpful, because then you get lots of people together, teams together for an hour or whatever, having support, because obviously there aren't enough psychotherapists to support every single health worker out there.
No, they're not. And in a way, the biggest battle early on is to try to get people to realize that support might be helpful. And it's a bit like if you go into a school to set up a counselling and therapy service, initially they just want to refer all the most difficult kids, and you say, well, would you like a group to think about what it's like to teach some of these kids? Oh no, I'm too busy for that. But once you start getting those things going, what happens is the teachers feel supported, they feel relaxed, their autonomic nervous system relaxes, probably their immune system, it gets back online, and all kinds of good things are happening. And actually what's interesting is they feel more empowered, they feel understood, but they also feel they can understand where the children are coming from more. They feel less judgmental of the kids. They feel less punitive with the kids. And actually, they refer less kids to therapy because they're feeling better in themselves. And I think something similar, in a way, that's another variant of what Beyond talked about in relation to containment, and possibly what Winnicott talks about in relation to holding, is that if you feel held in your role, then you can look after and support others. Otherwise, it just becomes something that burns you out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is this idea that you go into therapy to really pull things apart, and it's really difficult, and you're going to cry lots, and but actually therapy can be about recognizing the good aspects and what you're doing well, and reminding yourself of that because of this negativity bias.
Absolutely. And I think it's one of the things we've learned in the last 10 to 15 years, particularly, especially when working with trauma, is how easy it is to go for the negative and the difficult too quickly. And re-traumatize. But again, and how few people have got enough good internal resources, what in psychoanalysis we think of as a good internal object, to rely on in order to go out and venture out into these more difficult, challenging, threatening places. And if we can't build the good, these good sense of a good internal object, for example, you might want to use that language, or whatever language you want to use, then you can't safely open up to the difficulty. And I think that's true of all therapies, whether you're doing body therapy, whether you're doing psychoanalytic psychotherapy. In a way, we were talking about the frame before. It's about safeness. Actually, you feel safeness within the frame. In terms of mindfulness, you have to get into the right posture before you can open up to whatever's going on inside you. Otherwise, you might just tense up against it and not notice the tensing. So it's about that containing a more capacious container, which can support health workers, can support teachers, can support ourselves. And we owe ourselves as therapists to be looking after ourselves in this respect. And it's going to be a challenge if we can't leave the house. But I think that for me, for example, I know that without, a daily mindfulness practice, some exercise, some yoga, one or two of those things at least each day, I'm a worse therapist. And I'm a worse friend, I'm a worse partner, all of those things. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's just it's the autonomic response, isn't it? It's just it's almost like a sliding scale, and being aware of where you are on that scale all the time.
All the time.
Well, that's more challenging for those who are working in these in hospitals right now, because probably they're right at the top of that scale.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And you'll get, if they're lucky enough not to get infected by the virus in a way which is very damaging to them, they're going to get affected by the states of mind that they're witnessing. And I think some of the lessons that have come out of, for example, the research on the difference between empathy and compassion is really important. And it's also really important for us as psychotherapists that actually depends. I don't always define empathy like this, but if empathy is feeling weird and feeling what the other person is feeling, we need that to an extent. But if you doing that all the time, you just burn out.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can offer compassion, I really care about what you're thinking and feeling, and I wish you better, and I hope this doesn't happen, and I wish you well, but I'm not actually right in your feelings in quite the same way. Then all the research shows that actually that's much more resilience inducing, much less triggering, much less trauma inducing.
Yes.
And it's much less likely to give rise to burnout.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, on that note,
Okay.
I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to discuss or that you would like to communicate.
Only what I wrote in the blog, really, which is that there's a real danger that we are suspicious of other people, and that there's a peculiar analogy between fear of pathogens and infection and the kind of metaphors that are flying around from the lips of people like Donald Trump about, this being a foreign virus, a Chinese virus, etc.
Mm.
And I think we all notice, as if we're still going out, the extent to which we might be slightly shunning people, moving away, that kind of thing. And I think that that threat response, which also has an inflammatory element in terms of the kind of inflammatory cytokines that gets released, are very common and very high levels of those are seen in people who've had adverse childhood experiences, generally traumatic childhoods, and they'll be more threatened. But actually, we can do our little bit to, even if we do need to keep social distance, we can still smile, we can still look people in the eyes from 3 meters away. We can still say thank you. All of those sorts of things. I think sometimes it's the little things that make a big difference.
Yeah, to sort of consciously overcome the disgust response.
If you're in the force field of somebody who's showing you disdain or disgust or fear, then you blooming well know it. And so
Yeah.
I think we need to watch our own responses as best we can. And as you say, there are subliminal that are non-conscious. We can't help but show fear, but we can do a little bit about it, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks very much.